So what I do is I run a game studio, Schell Games. We mainly focus on educational games. At this point, we have our roots in entertainment, but we've been taking those and using them towards educational games. Oh, thanks very much. You guys are right on it. I also teach at Carnegie Mellon University at the Entertainment Technology Center, where I've been there for about 10 years. So I'm doing these two things in parallel. In addition, I used to be at Disney Imagineering, where I was the creative director of the virtual reality studio. And as mentioned, I wrote a book called The Art of Game Design. So today, what I wanted to talk about was about what games are good at. Is the idea to talk about. And I know for a lot of you, you already have a great grasp over this. And so I apologize if this ends up just being kind of an exercise in advanced common sense. But I was very interested in the opportunity to come and talk about this because it's something I've wanted to pull together for a while. Because I find that I deal with a number of people who get very excited about, yeah, games are going to solve all our problems, are going to be this magic bullet that boom, they just solve everything. When really, games are a much more subtle and nuanced tool that work very well in some circumstances and very poorly in others. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about this. This notion that games could be useful for education is not a new one. If you read Jonathan Locke, he wrote a piece in 1692 called Some Thoughts on Education, where he talks about, hey, I've always had a fancy that learning might be made a play and recreation to children. And he gets into very specific examples of the types of games that he thinks would work and the right attitudes with which to present these games and the psychology of these. And here it is 400 years later, and how we doing? Have these games like transformed us and really revolutionized education? It's not clear that they have. And I think part of what that points to is that it's not an easy business. If it was easy, we would have been doing it, for 400 years. So why isn't it easy? Well, I think it kind of is a good idea to step back for a second and sort of talk about, well, what are we actually talking about when we say games? Because we could mean a lot of things when we talk about games. So, well, in some ways it's obvious what a game is, right? A game is something you play. We know that. Right? But there's other things that you play that aren't games, right? You play with toys. They're not exactly games. You play the piano. That's definitely not a game. So what is it about kind of, what is play? When we say play, what do we mean? You play a game. What is play? And we know there's something special about play. We know play is not like work. We know play has its own qualities. There's certain things about it that are special. One thing we know about play is manipulation. It's choosing to change and manipulate something. That's an important part of play. But it's not just manipulation. There's something special when we talk about play, the kind of the play that really engages people and fully immerses them. It's manipulation that indulges curiosity. And I think this is a very important aspect. This is an important thing not to forget. This is part of the difference between work and play, is that when you are indulging your own curiosity, you really own what you're doing, and it feels the most like play. Okay, well, that's fine. So play is a manipulation that indulges curiosity. But what does that have to do with games? What makes a game a game? Well, first of all, games have goals. That's one of the key things when we talk about games. One of the central aspects. They do have goals. And put another way, every game is a problem to be solved. It's very hard to point to any game that's not a problem that needs to be solved. That's what you're doing when you're trying to win a game. And that problem might be, hey, how can we get the ball through the hoop more times than those guys are going to get the ball through the hoop? It's still a problem that you have to solve, and you're going to come up with a strategy for solving that. And it's partly why we like games so much, is because as humans we love solving problems. We really get immersed in that. We really enjoy it. So there you go. A game is a problem-solving activity. But that doesn't completely ring true, because there's lots of problem-solving activities that don't feel at all like games. There's lots of them that are kind of boring and don't really fully engage us. What is it that's special about games as a problem-solving activity? And I think the key is play. A game is a problem-solving activity that you approach in a playful way. And that's what makes them special. So all right, so here's our little dictionary so far. Right? Play is manipulation that indulges curiosity, and a game is a problem-solving activity that you approach playfully. And I like to bring these definitions out because I think they're interesting to think about, but also I think they help us focus on what we're talking about. It's very easy to say, oh, we're going to do games. That means we're doing digital. Well, does it? I mean, not necessarily. There's lots of games that aren't digital, and you can do digital without doing games. You can get a lot of the benefits. You know, you certainly get a lot of benefits from doing some things digital that aren't necessarily games. But these are the things I want to focus on today in terms of play and games. In other words, when you're manipulating things that indulge your curiosity and when you're approaching problems in a playful manner, what are those things good at when it comes to the world of education? And I want to make a distinction here. We talk about serious games a lot. This was a term that was coined a few years ago because it was partly because people were getting a little nervous about the term educational games. And there are a number of games that weren't for entertainment. They weren't exactly education. They were meant to do something else that was important. And so we came up with this word serious games, which is a strange phrase. I actually had someone come to me and say, hey, I'm trying to make a game that helps people learn how to be, you know, the structures of comedic principles. And I'm like, yeah, a serious game about comedy is what that would be. Yeah. I prefer to use a different term. I like to use the term transformational games. If you would all like to start using that term, I personally would quite welcome it because I think it's a better and more useful term. Because as opposed to entertainment games, which are often intended to amuse, and maybe we don't really care if you come out different on the other side, what we're talking about with these sort of serious games is we want this game to change you. We want it to transform you in some way, and part of the reason I think it's an important phrase is it brings the most important question and puts it up front. How should the game change you? And this is the central question of all education. Anytime you do education, we're going to change people. Well, how? How do we want them to be different? We want them to learn algebra. What does that mean to learn algebra? How will they be different afterwards? Will they just be able to do mechanical computation? Or are you talking about a transformation where they see the world in a different way in terms of variables? These are very different things, and people, they're tough questions to ask, and people tend to shy away from them. But in terms of creating games that really make a difference for people, how will the game change someone is the central question. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give, this is my little 7-Eleven talk. I'm going to talk about 7 things that games are bad at and 11 things that I think that they're pretty good at. So that's a lot of things, so let's just jump in. One of them is, in terms of being bad at, games are bad at being cheap, right? Particularly digital games. There's a lot of talk about, oh, this is going to save us a lot of money in the long run. Maybe it will, but in the short run, wow, you have to spend your money carefully. Games can be quite expensive to produce. They certainly cost more to take a textbook and say we're going to make the game equivalent of this textbook. You're going to have a significantly higher cost because digital games have there's issues of rich content. There's issues of playtesting and iteration, and there's issues of, in some ways, the game is trying to coach the student, and a lot of complicated algorithms need to go into that. And it's very easy for your scope to get much bigger than you had initially anticipated. And what this means is that when you're going to go for a digital game solution, you shouldn't do it in just kind of a, well, we'll just kind of wander over that way. You should do it in a targeted way to make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck, because you can get a lot of bang, but you really want it to be targeted because it's not usually a cheap endeavor. It also points to the notion that, hey, maybe you don't have to do it in a digital way, and you can still have a game approach, and maybe that'll be a good idea. Here's another one that games are bad at. They're bad at tricking students into learning. This is one everyone always talks about. Yeah, we're going to give this game. It's going to be so fun, but they're not going to realize what we really are teaching them, right? I love this little video clip. Hopefully I got the audio here with my last-minute tech.
Awesome! I'm blasting all the state capitals! Oh, take that, Salem, Oregon! Wait a minute, this game is educational. That'll teach you to teach me.
Right? Because the notion of authenticity is very important. You know, when people are playing, you know, it's a real and genuine thing. It's about them owning it and them doing this. And if they realize, hey, I'm being manipulated, wait a second, you're trying to, it spoils the whole thing. There's a lot of talk about, we're going to trick them into learning certain things. In my experience, that doesn't work very well. I can't point to a bunch of places where that's worked really great. Now, there are plenty of places where there are sort of multiple contexts going on at once where, like, look, yeah, you're going to learn about this, but let's learn about it in this broader, kind of more interesting context. That's what all good teachers do. They present kind of a situation that you care about, and as you go through that situation, you start to realize that this learning is important. So I say, if you're considering trying to trick people into learning something, that you should use caution, because it does mean on some level you're lying to the students. This is an interesting one, just talking about how fragile this can be. We'd worked on this with MacArthur. We worked on this U Media Center in Chicago, which is a place where it's designed for inner city kids to be able to learn digital technologies, to learn how to make their own digital music and make their own videos and animations and games and all kinds of things. And we tried to design this to be a place that was very much, this is not part of any curriculum. This is a place you go and hang out after school, and then hopefully you'll learn to make stuff because you want to. There's nothing more to it than that. And we saw how fragile certain things were. One of the things we designed into the place was we put these whiteboards, because we're like, hey, kids are going to do stuff. We want them to be creative. Whiteboards are a good tool for creativity. The kids never go near the whiteboards. And in fact, you can see what they've done now is they've just kind of moved tables up here. The whiteboards are actually fairly inaccessible. Now, just for fun, so we put 5 of these normal whiteboards, and then we put this one whiteboard that we carved into the shape of a tree. Just a little signature piece. We thought it would be kind of fun. The kids never go near these rectangle whiteboards. They can't stop drawing on this thing. We've had to replace it twice because it's just been written on so much. And which seemed crazy to me. And I'm like, what is it? And the thing is, when they see this rectangular whiteboard over here, that's school. That's work, that's school, that's unpleasant, and it's like, ugh, that's the thing I have to do. This sort of crazy thing, this is more just, we want to do it, right? It's a very fragile little bubble, this difference between I have to do something and I want to do something. And you have to treat it carefully and gingerly, and certainly being deceptive puts you in danger there. Another thing games are bad at, there's a lot of talk about, oh, you can do anything you want in a game, limitless exploration. Well, that's really expensive, right? I mean, it just is. I mean, the more things you add in there, the more cost there's going to be. Yes, you could theoretically do it. If you had billions of dollars, you could just keep adding and adding and adding. But in reality, you're probably going to be in a more narrow place. Now, certainly you can add tools that allow for a kind of limitless exploration. You look at Minecraft, it's a building tool. Kids can build all kinds of things. Now, you're limited within the Minecraft universe to what it can do, but they have, in some ways, it's limitless, but in a lot of ways, it's not. So, again, don't try not to swallow the pill of, oh, we can do anything, because no, you probably, unless you have a limitless budget, you probably can't have limitless exploration. Another one, time limits. So much of what happens in classrooms is on a rigid time schedule. Look, we got 42 minutes, and we got to take attendance, and we got to do this. Games don't want to be in a little time box. Games really excel at, hey, take the time you want to learn at your own pace. And trying to cram that into a classroom setting can be tricky. Not to say that it can't be done. There's ways you can use timing in there. But if you're going for the idea of, hey, you're going to learn at your own pace, and we're going to put it during class time, those two things are going to fight. And so much better games can serve as homework, or where you actually do have the time to work at it at your own pace. Another one is understanding mistakes. Good teaching is good coaching, and good coaching means You observe what somebody does, you see their mistakes, you kind of call out, aha, this is the thing right here. This is the thing you need to work on. Games can be very good at identifying mistakes. Yeah, you didn't get the ball in the hoop, but what exactly you did wrong, they're not so, I'm not saying, there are certainly people who have done things with cognitive tutors and things that attempt to kind of make an analysis of what are the mistakes that the student is making, but very often on their own, they're not so great at this. Much better is to use the game to get the student to make a mistake and then have a coach there, a teacher there who can say, there it is, that's what you did wrong. The idea of using the sort of teacher as dungeon master paired with a simulation, because this is what games are bad at understanding mistakes. Teachers are very, very good at it. Games are bad at having long shelf lives. You know, you can write a textbook and in some cases use the same textbook for 20 years. It's rare that you kind of use the same game. There's a lot, we all talk about fondly, oh, remember Oregon Trail, remember Carmen Sandiego, remember these great games of the ancient past that are dead because the hardware is gone and can't even get the thing to run. I mean, here, Oregon Trail 2 for Windows 95, 98, ME, and Macintosh, right? I like the bottom. Challenge the unpredictable frontier. Yeah, that's, it's unpredictable, all right. This is published by America Online. That'll tell you we're all about that. So when you're kind of figuring out your budgets, you know, you should consider that. And another one, as much as we love to say how fascinating and interesting and oh, kids are so engaged with games and everybody's so engaged with games, games don't stay interesting forever. Most people treat games kind of like disposable cups. Yeah, you know, I played that for 3 months and then, man, I was kind of done. I don't really need it anymore. And if you have an idea that, no, people are going to be interested in my game for years and years, that doesn't, most of us entertainment folks, we'd love to be able to make a game that engage people that way. We have a hard time doing it. Now, one thing I happened to, I met a student when I was on a trip recently who made this great point that I just loved. And yeah, Krister Persson, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned his name during this talk because he said it. I never heard anyone say it before, that there's a great synergy there. Because education, oftentimes it's meant to be a one-time thing. Once you've learned this, you've learned it. Congratulations, you don't need to learn it anymore. And if, to the extent that you can take that kind of disposable nature, that kind of one-way nature, and take it with the fact that games kind of get used up, that actually works out really well. That's something to think about. Okay, so there's 7 things that games aren't so good at. Let's get into the things. Let's talk about the good news, the things that games are better at. One of the things games are really good at is giving the brain what it wants. The brain wants a lot of things. It's a busy bee. It wants all kinds of stuff. And games are good at providing some of those things. So let's talk about some of those. One of them is visible progress. We love progress. The brain loves progress. It likes to know. Why does it like it? Because it's like, am I wasting my time? The brain doesn't want to waste time. It wants to be efficient. It wants to be as good as it can. And if you're doing something and you can't tell whether you're getting any better, the brain gets itchy. It's like, I don't know if I should be doing this. Maybe we should be doing something else. But if you can give me marks of visible progress and thumbs up that, yep, going the right way, this is all good, going the right way. And games are really good at that. It's a thing that they do. Another thing games are good at, they take abstract things and they make them concrete. And it turns out part of the reason the brain likes concrete things is because, you know, there's parts of the brain that are about abstract ideas and parts that are about concrete. If you're just focused on abstract ideas, the parts of the brain that want to deal with concrete stuff are bored. They're itchy. They're looking for something to do. They're like, this is so inefficient. Why can't we do something that I can get my hands around? Games are often very good at taking abstract things, making them more visible, taking the invisible, making it visible so that you can manipulate it and play with it and use more parts of the brain simultaneously. And full engagement. This is part of the notion. The brain likes to be fully engaged. It doesn't like to have one part of it, one part of the mind working hard and the other part's just kind of sitting around, right? So people here who you drive a car, who listens to music in the car? Right? Everybody listens to music in the car. Why? I mean, it seems insane actually to listen to music in the car, right? Here you are engaged in a complicated task that if you screw it up, you may die.
And you're like, yeah, I'm going to distract myself now. That seems insane. But we know the truth is you're actually freeing yourself of distraction. Because when you don't have the music going, that part of your, part of your brain is like the physical, visual part is like fully engaged, and then there are other parts of your brain that are just like, I'm bored, this is boring, I'm so bored, can we do something else? Can we look at something else? Can we do something else? And you're like, oh, shut up, here's something now, shut up, right? And you put the music on. And like I like audiobooks a lot, and for me it's great because audiobooks in the car, I can listen to that while I'm driving, I feel fully engaged. I can't sit home and listen to an audiobook. My hands are like, can we do something? There's nothing going on. There's nothing to look at. But that combination of the two together is full engagement. And this is what games are often good at. We're not just going to ask you to think abstractly about the nature of topology. We're going to show it to you. We're going to let you touch it. We're going to let you handle it. We're going to let you solve problems with it. And part of this gets into fantasy motivations. This is something games are really good at. They give you these sort of fantasy reasons. Looking at the great math games created by the Mind Institute. I think I've got that name right. Like, all of their math games are about a penguin kind of getting from here to there. Now, penguins don't really have anything to do with math, but they put the penguin there as something consistent, and because it makes you care more about this XY Cartesian plane, right? You could just focus on the Cartesian plane, but if it's like, no, you need to do that so the penguin can get across the ice, there's part of your brain that's like, I care about that. I've got a little emotional, there's an emotional, social part of your brain. It's like, I'd like to be helping somebody. I'm helping an imaginary penguin. It's better than nothing, right? Now, some people criticize this and they say, people shouldn't be coddled to like this. They should have the discipline to focus on the abstract task, and the other parts of the brain should sit quietly, and they should wait. And that's one point of view, that you should learn to be more mentally disciplined, and that's fine. But what I often think about is the marshmallow test. For people who are familiar with this notion, this is a simple test. They've given it to all kinds of people, but there's a long series of studies where they give this test to children, where they say something very simple. Look, there's a marshmallow right here, and here's how it's going to work. I'm going to go in the other room for a few minutes, and if I come back and the marshmallow is still here, second marshmallow for you. But if I come back and it's not here, well, okay. That's okay. You can eat this marshmallow if you want. Anytime you want, you can eat it. But if you can wait till I get back, 2 marshmallows. And they've done all kinds of studies on this because it's almost horrifying, the extent to which this test is predictive of a person's life. Children at the age of 5 who succeed at the marshmallow test get higher SAT scores when they're 18. Something's very important is going on here. And is it a question of iron will? Is it a question of maybe some people are just stronger and they know how to stare down the marshmallow and they're disciplined? And they've studied it, and that's not what it is. It's other strategies. And some of the most common strategies are fantasy strategies. I'm going to imagine that the marshmallow is not there. I'm going to imagine that the marshmallow is poisonous. I'm going to imagine that it's a picture of a marshmallow. I'm not actually going to look at the marshmallow. I'm going to think about something else. I'm going to think about a unicorn jumping over a rainbow, and I'm going to distract myself until I get back. These end up being the strategies that end up working in the marshmallow test, and really, they end up working in real life too. We don't like to talk about it as grown-ups, our little fantasies that we have. I remember reading Marvin Minsky talking about this in his book Society of Minds, and he admitted how one of the things that really motivates him to do his research when he's bored is he has an arch nemesis, this other researcher. And whenever he gets bored and he feels like kind of slacking off, he imagines that guy is like soaring ahead and doing all this work. He's like, ooh, I'm not going to let that guy, ooh, I'm back at it. I'll show him. And it's not really happening, it's a little fantasy, but it's a useful fantasy. And so it may well be that giving kids and giving everyone tools to kind of engage the fantasy parts of the brain can be effective in unexpected ways. One of them that I like is this research at Vanderbilt University, this game called Betty's Brain. And the whole idea is it's not going to be a game that you play. It's about you're going to help this virtual character get smarter. And there have been lots of studies that it's one thing for you to succeed. It's another thing for you to help another character succeed. Almost to the point they've done tests where they'll have the same game, identical game, and they'll tell one group of kids, this is about you solving problems, and they'll tell the other group of kids, this is about you helping this character on here. Ooh, they need help, and you need to help them solve the problems. The kids who help, are in the helping mode, do better, remember more. Why? It's engaging the social parts and the empathic parts of the brain. And I love this business of reading to dogs. I don't know if people have seen this. Libraries do this all over the place. Kids come in who are learning to read, and they read books to dogs. Why? Are the dogs excited about this? Not really, but they're, because it turns out dogs understand relatively few books. Maybe it's a book about their name and like supper time or something, but other than that, they just kind of sit there. But the kids are more focused. They could just read to themselves out loud, but it turns out they're more focused. They pay more attention when they're reading to someone else because the kids, they feel like they're reading to someone else, and better than reading to certain adults who kind of sigh at mistakes and criticize and pick and go back, no, I think you said that wrong. Is that what it really said? The dogs don't do that. The dogs just sit and listen, right? And I often think, hey, if our games can do nothing else, they can at least be as good as these dogs, I think. Okay, so games are good at giving the brain what it wants. There's a lot of things the brain wants. Another one is illustrating complex systems. There are a lot of things that involve complex systems, whether they be chemical systems or physical systems or engineering systems or political systems or religious systems or systems of dramatic structure that are difficult to explain textually, difficult to explain verbally, even difficult to explain with a picture or just an animation, because you need to see the complicated cause and effect relationships. And this is one thing games really excel at. What happens, the old saying, you can't put too much water in a nuclear reactor. Well, wait, what does that mean? Does that mean, well, you'll find out. Try putting a lot of water in and see what that actually means. Flow is a concept I'm sure many people are familiar with, and this is one thing games really excel at. This is Csikszentmihalyi's theory of that the mind enters the state of flow, which is this place where you're just so into what you're doing that you lose track of time. You don't know what's going on outside the world because you're so focused on the task. It's a very important mental state, and so much has been tied to that in terms of productivity and even happiness. It seems to be the single most important psychological structure for long-term happiness in a person's life is, do they enter flow? And certainly for learning, flow is incredibly important. It's what keeps people on task. And games are often good at this. They're good at balancing this magical place that's in between, it's too easy, I'm bored, or it's too frustrating, it's too hard. They're good at keeping you in this middle place. New points of view is something games are really good at, because they don't just tell you about a thing, they let you become something you never could become, right? Merlin taught King Arthur about the world by turning him into all these different animals so he could experience what is it like to be these different animals. Games do this too. I learned a lot about dolphins just by playing Echo the Dolphin. No one needs to tell you, well, here's how long dolphins can hold their breath, because you're a dolphin, and like you're gonna die if you don't get up to the surface, and your dolphin starts gasping, and and you better get up there, and you learn it and you know it in a new way. And this is very powerful. Certainly, the game Ossie had worked on Peacemaker. This is what it was all about: understanding the point of view of someone who you have opposition with. This is what the whole point of this game was. It wasn't really to give you facts about the situation. It was about understanding the problems that the folks on the other side had, because the goal is you play this from the other side and see if you can make peace, and it's more difficult than you'd think. Another one is authenticity. Games can be good at being authentic because they're not just telling you about something, they're immersing you in it, and you're dealing with it. This can be a challenge to get them to the place where they are authentic enough, but they often can cross this line. I've worked quite a bit with firefighters trying to make simulations they care about, and our initial ones were very abstract, and we thought, oh, that's all you need. You just need a little map, and you need to understand the strategies. And they couldn't relate to that. They could only relate to it when things looked realistic, and in fact, we had to change the uniforms so that it looked like their uniforms. And once it was realistic enough, like this seemed real and it seemed authentic to them, and then they could believe it in a way they wouldn't believe someone just giving them facts. Now, the opposite of that is games are also good at raising questions because they're not authentic. You know, the map is not the territory. A simulation is always imperfect, and a lot of people say, well, we can't use these simulations. They're not perfect. But the truth is, bad simulations educate better than good simulations. Because when you run into a wall in a bad simulation, you're like, wait a second. The real world doesn't work like this. There would be air resistance, wouldn't there? Does that matter in this case? And then you get into this big question of, well, wait, is that actually relevant? And what is relevant? And what are the key factors and principles? And how is this simulation different than reality? And it gets you into this cycle of thinking about how things really are. And I've seen it again and again. I've seen it in, these are some of our students working on economics games, and I've seen it there, and I've seen it in emergency rescue, and I've seen it in kind of physics simulations. So for me, this always gives me a lot of confidence. You don't have to worry, what if our simulation's not perfect? It's like, it better not be perfect, because you're much better off if it's not, weirdly. And shared experiences is another thing games can be great at. Now that we can, you know, certainly multiplayer board games are one thing, but when we start to get into these networked multiplayer games, they create an ability for a shared experience that is unsurpassed from what I've seen. I've done a lot of work with firefighters in that regard. This is pictures from Rapid Response Sim created by Silver Tree Media. The way this one in particular is designed to be used for hospital personnel and to help them train to deal with an emergency happening within the hospital. And the way it works is you just 8 laptops set up around a table, and everybody has a different role, and you go in here and you deal with this emergency. And by having it be a shared experience that you all do together, and then you do a debrief afterwards, everyone now has had a common experience where they've seen something go right, seen something go wrong, and they can all talk about it. And more important, not just shared with the students, which is good because it gets discussion, shared with the instructor who sees it and can kind of have some common conversation. One of the most fascinating ones I saw was at the, I believe I was at the Naval Postgraduate School. They had this simulation where some of the students in the class would participate live. Other students would observe and had free-floating cameras that could go anywhere and watch what was going on, and they could mark. They had a little bookmark function. When they saw something that they're like, these guys screwed up, or that was really cool, and they could mark it. And then afterwards, the whole class would do a debrief, and the students who participated would have to defend their actions, and the students who'd been observing would kind of ask questions, and they'd say, I think you should have done this differently, and they could pop like, hey, everybody, let's look at this moment. And we'll just rewind it. Let's look at the moment where you did this and you did this. I think that was wrong. It was a shared experience that everyone could participate in together and review together. It's very powerful. Independent exploration is something, of course, games are good at, because you know, if you can have you can do your own experiments and kind of see how it turns out. You can put your own hands in there and do the things that you want to do. And there's a lot of power in that. Practice for dangerous situations. This is a real strength of games. Certainly, I've seen this in firefighter and medical. There are a lot of situations they never get you trained for. That they just, it could happen one day. Yeah, there could be a sarin gas attack, but who trains for that? We're busy training for fires because they happen every day. And we're working on a project with Yale right now about, helping young teenagers prepare for the situations. They're gonna, what about someone pressures you to have sex at a party? Like, how are you going to deal with that? And this game gives you practice in like, well, what would I do? And thinking it through ahead of time. Games are great at this, and people are excited about dangerous situations, and so there's a natural draw. One of my favorites is the creation of teachable moments. This was a huge insight for me. A lot of times you get resistance from instructors when you say, I'd like to bring a game into your classroom. They say, oh, is this designed to replace me, huh? Which is a natural thing to say, and obviously a game is going to be a terrible coach compared to a teacher. But if you bring it a different way and you say, well, what's going to make this teacher more effective? How can I magnify what they're good at? All good teachers create scenarios in the classroom to try and engage the minds of the students. if you can give the teacher a set of tools that lets them create more vivid, more rich scenarios and manipulate them at the key moments, because good teaching very often is, I'm going to put you in the situation, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and you're going to make a mistake, and I'm going to be there, and I'm going to say, see that mistake you just made? This is why you need to know about principle X. Because I could tell you about principle X, and you'd be like, whatever, but if you just screwed up, the brain hates screwing up. It hates failure. And when you catch someone in that moment, like, that's the teachable moment that all good instructors are looking for. Games are good at tools for creating teachable moments. This is one I never forget, just watching Tony Musserfidi, who's a masterful educator of firefighters. We started creating these simulations at his direction. And we're talking about a team of students who really care. Firefighters who work with each other every day. They recognize that if one of them screws up in the simulation and lets another guy die, like, there's no joking around. These guys all get that, like, oh, that could have really happened. It's really serious. And he was great at creating these situations where they would screw up, and you'd see they'd all be like, oh my God, what just happened? And he'd be right in there with, like, and what should you have done? I remember seeing one of these it was a senior guy. The guy was maybe 45 who made this mistake. And he realized it. He realized, I was just looking, I wasn't listening. I should have been listening. And if I was listening, I would have heard that. I'll tell you right now, I will never make that mistake again. And it can be very, very powerful, the ability to create these teachable moments. But all too often, I don't think it's where we as educational game designers put our focus, and it really should be. And then the last one, giving students ownership. Ownership is so important. I would argue that right now, this is the educational revolution that's happening. We're coming out of an educational system that was designed to produce factory workers, that was designed to kind of get people to, listen, I'm smart, you're dumb, sit still, I'm going to give you this information. You need to practice sitting still and doing what you're told, because your career is going to be about that. And we're moving now into a culture where, no, being an inventor and being creative and taking charge of your own learning, because now with the internet, you can learn anything at any time. Self-education is now more possible than it's ever been before. And the students who are curious are going to rocket ahead of everyone else, which raises this important question of, what do we do to make people curious? And part of it is this notion of owning your own education, that you are in charge of it. It's not that some organization is going to tell you, here's what you learn, that you yourself should be deciding what you're going to learn and why. And games can be a powerful tool that way. I was reading one of the Horace's Compromise book by Theodore Sizer, and he talks about this notion of agreement. He has this quote here: if effective learning is to take place, student and teacher must agree on the objective and the means to reach it. And that, in traditional education, doesn't always happen. Games are very good at getting that agreement, because students can often believe in the games in a way they might not believe in something else, and it can be a little more collaborative that way. Because when you play a game and you're driven by your own curiosity, you're solving problems because you want to, and you own it in a special way. Because the thing about curiosity, when a game sparks curiosity, no one can give you curiosity. You can only manufacture it yourself. But well-crafted games can often sort of be the right tools to help encourage you to produce your own curiosity. Thank you. Do we have time for questions or move? Okay, we have time for one awesome question. Yeah, okay, so there's a couple things. One is the bibliography of there's a bibliography in my textbook that those things are kind of a little more game focused. And I also have a blog I keep called thingsifinished.com that has books and movies and a lot of things on there. All right. All right, well, thanks again. Oh, one. Oh, yeah, sorry. There you go.